Some people believe in fate, that two people are destined to cross paths, pulled together by some invisible thread. I never used to think that way. I believed in discipline, in logic, in choices leading to consequences. But when I met Lauren, something in me shifted. I was never the guy who made grand romantic gestures or believed in love at first sight. My life had always been about structure. I grew up in a family of law enforcement. My father, my grandfather, even my older brother wore the badge. It was the only life I knew, and I embraced it fully. Routine, discipline, and order weren't just values to me. They were the foundation of who I was. I took pride in my work, in the sense of justice it gave me. There was a right way and a wrong way to do things, and I always made sure I was on the right side of that line. Lauren was nothing like me. She was unpredictable, full of energy, and lived in the moment. She worked in event planning, a job that suited her perfectly, always moving, always talking, always making people feel like they were the most important person in the room. She had this way of commanding attention without even trying. When she walked into a space, you felt her presence. It wasn't just her beauty. Though she was beautiful, it was her confidence, the way she carried herself like she owned every second of her life. We met at a 4th of July barbecue, the kind where the whole neighborhood shows up, kids run around with sparklers, and the smell of burgers and grilled corn fills the air. I was off duty that day, drinking a beer with some of the guys from the department when I first saw her. She was arguing with the guy manning the grill, hands on her hips, insisting he was ruining a perfectly good steak. I remember watching her, amused by the fire in her voice, the way she didn't back down. I walked over, more curious than anything. "You always this passionate about barbecue?" I asked, half smirking. She turned to look at me, and for a second, I felt like I'd been caught in a gust of wind. Her green eyes flicked up to meet mine, and then she laughed, loud, uninhibited, like she didn't care who was listening. "Only when it matters," she said. That was Lauren. Full of opinions, full of life, always ready to debate over the smallest things like they were life and death. It was impossible not to be drawn to her. That night, we talked for hours. She told me about her job, about how she loved planning weddings and big events because she liked seeing people at their happiest. I told her about my work, and she listened with genuine interest, asking questions that no one outside of law enforcement ever thought to ask. She wasn't intimidated by what I did, and she didn't look at me with that mix of pity and caution that some women did when they found out I was a cop. By the time the fireworks started lighting up the sky, I knew I wanted to see her again. And for the first time in a long time, I let go of my usual caution and just went with it. Lauren and I were different in almost every way, but somehow, that night, it felt like we fit. Lauren and I started dating soon after that barbecue, and from the very beginning, she turned my life upside down in the best way possible. She had this way of making everything feel exciting, like even the most ordinary moments could turn into an adventure. Before I met her, my life followed a predictable routine. Wake up early, work my shift, go to the gym, have dinner, and get to bed at a reasonable hour. That all changed with Lauren. She hated routine. She loved surprises, spontaneity, anything that shook up the expected. I remember one night, about a month into dating, I had just finished a late shift and was looking forward to nothing more than collapsing into bed. Then my phone rang. "Come outside," she said. I found her sitting on the hood of her car, 2 milkshakes in hand. "We're going on an adventure," she announced. It was almost midnight. I had work in the morning. But when I saw the way her eyes sparkled, how she was practically bouncing with excitement, I sighed, climbed into the passenger seat, and let her take me wherever she wanted to go. That night, we ended up driving an hour out of the city just to watch the stars. She talked about constellations, told me stories about Greek mythology, and asked me questions about my childhood. It was the first time in a long time that I let my guard down, that I stopped thinking about work, about responsibilities, about the weight of the world on my shoulders. With Lauren, it was easy to forget about all of that. We fell in love fast. She was passionate, and when she loved something or someone, she loved them with everything she had. I think that's what made me fall for her so hard. She didn't hold back. She made me feel like the most important person in the world, like nothing else mattered when we were together. We moved in together after a year of dating. I was nervous about it at first. I liked my space, my order, my quiet. Lauren was the opposite. She filled the apartment with music, with laughter, with color. She'd leave notes for me in the most random places, inside my uniform pocket, on the bathroom mirror, even in my patrol car when she managed to sneak one in. She made every day feel like something worth celebrating. Of course, we had our differences. She hated how much time my job took up. I worked long shifts, sometimes overnight, and when things got bad in the city, I'd barely be home. She wanted me to leave the force, to do something safer, something with more predictable hours. But being a cop wasn't just a job to me, it was who I was. Still, we made it work. She accepted my job, just like I accepted that she was always going to be surrounded by people, always planning the next big event. Our lives were chaotic, but they worked together. Or at least, that's what I believed. The years passed, and our life settled into something that felt stable, even if it wasn't always conventional. Lauren and I weren't the kind of couple that did everything by the book. We never had a rigid 5-year plan, never mapped out every step of the future, but we knew we wanted to build a life together. We got married 3 years after we met. It wasn't a huge, extravagant event. Despite Lauren being an event planner, she insisted she wanted something small and intimate. I do this for other people all the time, she told me. For us, I just wanted to feel real. We exchanged vows in a quiet ceremony at a lakefront venue just outside the city. It was the kind of place she loved, open, full of natural beauty, nothing overly structured. She walked down the aisle barefoot, laughing when her dress caught on the grass. I remember standing there, watching her, thinking that there was no one else in the world I would ever love the way I loved her. Marriage didn't change us much. We were still the same Daniel and Lauren, her pulling me into the unpredictable, me keeping her grounded when she needed it. She continued to thrive in her career, planning massive galas and luxury weddings, always moving from one project to the next. My job remained the same, long hours, unpredictable shifts, the weight of responsibility never quite leaving my shoulders. We talked about kids in the early years of our marriage, but it was never something Lauren seemed in a rush for. She always said someday, always brushed it off as something for the future. I was patient. I figured we had time. And besides, we were happy, at least, I thought we were. Our home became a reflection of us. The living room was filled with books, candles, little trinkets Lauren picked up from antique shops. The kitchen was hers, organized chaos, always something baking, always music playing. Our bedroom was my sanctuary, the one place where things felt calm, neat, orderly. We made space for each other, even in our differences. Lauren was always the life of the party. She had friends everywhere, old friends, new friends, people she barely knew but still greeted like family. She was social in a way I never could be. I liked people, but I didn't crave their company the way she did. When she hosted dinner parties, I'd play the role of the supportive husband, sitting at the table, listening to conversations swirl around me. She shined in those moments, telling stories, making people laugh. I loved watching her like that, seeing how easily she fit into any space. But at the end of the night, it was just the two of us. No matter how busy her world was, she always came home to me. She'd curl up against me on the couch, her head resting on my chest, and tell me about her day. It didn't matter how different we were, when it was just us, we fit. For years, I thought we had everything. I thought we had built something unshakable. I thought we were solid. But love, no matter how strong, doesn't make you immune to the things you don't see coming. Looking back, I wonder when it really started. Was it one moment? A slow shift over time? Did I miss the signs, or did I just refuse to see them? For years, Lauren and I had a rhythm. Even with our differences, we always found our way back to each other. But then, something changed. At first, it was small. The kind of things you don't notice right away because they blend into the noise of daily life. She started coming home later than usual, brushing it off as work running over. I didn't think much of it. Her job had always been unpredictable. But it wasn't just the late nights. It was the way she seemed distracted, how she'd glance at her phone and smile before quickly tucking it away. She became more distant, but not in an obvious way. She still laughed, still kissed me goodbye in the morning, still played music while she cooked. But there was something missing in those moments, something I couldn't quite name. I told myself I was imagining it. That people change, that after years together, the excitement naturally settles into something quieter. I figured she was just stressed, busy, exhausted from work. I reminded myself that I worked long hours too, that maybe I wasn't as present as I used to be. Then there were the nights she'd come home smelling like perfume that wasn't hers. It wasn't one she ever wore, something floral and too sweet. When I mentioned it, she laughed. It's probably from work, clients, venues, who knows, she said, waving it off. And maybe she was right. Maybe that's all it was. But something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. Lauren had always been the type to share everything, what she ate for lunch, the funny thing a coworker said, The disaster that almost ruined an event she planned. She talked about her world like it was ours. But now, there were gaps. Blank spaces in her stories. People she mentioned in passing but never by name. A client, she'd say. A new contact. I started to feel like there was a part of her life I wasn't seeing. Then came the excuses. She started making plans without me more often. Dinners with friends I'd never met. Weekend work retreats that hadn't existed before. She'd get dressed up in a way she hadn't in years, wearing new clothes I'd never seen her buy. When I asked why she didn't tell me about these plans sooner, she'd sigh, annoyed. It's just work, Daniel. You're always busy anyway. It wasn't just her words, it was the way she said them. Like she was daring me to argue. I wasn't the jealous type. I trusted my wife. But for the first time, I started to wonder if I was being blind. Still, I pushed those thoughts away. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband. I didn't want to be the man who questioned every little thing. So, I told myself that I was overthinking it, that I had nothing to worry about, that Lauren was still mine. But deep down, I knew something was slipping away. The distance between Lauren and me was growing, but neither of us spoke about it. It lingered in the air like something unspoken, a weight pressing down on me every time I looked at her. I wanted to believe that nothing had changed, that this was just a rough patch, that life had gotten in the way of who we used to be. But deep down, I knew better. Lauren had always been full of energy, always the one to fill our home with laughter and conversation. But now, she was quieter when she was with me, her mind somewhere else even when we were in the same room. She was still outgoing, still vibrant with other people, her friends, her coworkers, strangers at dinner parties, but with me, it was like she was going through the motions. She smiled at the right times, laughed when she was supposed to, but I could feel the absence of something real. She was on her phone more, always typing, always quick to lock the screen when I glanced over. She used to share everything funny texts from her friends, complaints about a difficult client, but now, she was guarded. If I asked who she was texting, she'd say, just work stuff, with a forced casualness that didn't sit right. The excuses became more frequent. More late nights, more sudden dinner plans that I wasn't invited to, more unexplained absences. I told myself it was her job, that event planning had always been unpredictable, that she was just busy. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was slipping further and further away. The moments that used to make me feel close to her were gone. She didn't rest her head on my chest at night like she used to. She didn't reach for my hand absent-mindedly when we walked down the street. When I kissed her, she kissed me back. But there was something missing. Passion? Effort? I wasn't sure, but I knew it wasn't the same. I tried to ignore it. I convinced myself that maybe I was imagining things, that every marriage had ups and downs, that we were just in a rut. I worked long hours, maybe too many. Maybe I wasn't putting in enough effort myself. But then there were the small things, the ones that felt impossible to ignore. The unfamiliar perfume that clung to her skin. The new lingerie she bought but never wore around me. The way she seemed happier when she thought I wasn't looking, as if there was a part of her life that had nothing to do with me. I told myself I was overthinking, that I had no reason not to trust my wife. But something didn't feel right. And no matter how much I tried to push it down, the doubt had already taken root. The feeling wouldn't go away. It clung to me like a weight I couldn't shake, a gnawing unease that sat at the back of my mind no matter how much I tried to push it aside. Lauren was still the same woman I married, at least, that's what I kept telling myself. She still kissed me goodbye in the mornings, still asked about my day, still curled up on the couch with a glass of wine in the evenings. But it all felt like a performance. Like she was acting out the role of a devoted wife while her mind was somewhere else. I started watching her more closely, noticing things I had ignored before. The way she always had her phone in her hand, how she turned the screen away from me when I walked by. The way she suddenly had a password on it, even though we had always been open about our devices before. The way she started dressing differently, paying more attention to her appearance, wearing outfits that felt less like her usual style and more like something else. I wasn't the kind of man to snoop. I believed in trust, in privacy, in not needing to check up on the person you love. But doubt has a way of turning trust into something fragile, something uncertain. One night, while Lauren was asleep, I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling. The soft glow of her phone screen flickered as she received a notification. She shifted slightly, as if instinctively guarding it, even in her sleep. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to turn away. I didn't want to be the kind of man who checked his wife's phone. I didn't want to believe that I had a reason to. But something inside me had already started to break. The next day, I made an effort. I asked her if she wanted to go out for dinner, just the two of us. We hadn't had a real date night in months, and I wanted to remind myself of what we had. She hesitated, then smiled, tucking her hair behind her ear. I have a late meeting, she said. Maybe this weekend? I nodded, forcing a smile, but I felt it in my gut. A lie. I watched her get ready that evening, watched her put on makeup she didn't usually wear, a dress that seemed too elegant for a work meeting. She looked beautiful, she always did, but something about it felt wrong. I stood in the doorway as she grabbed her purse, my throat tight. I'll wait up for you, I said. She hesitated for half a second. A tiny pause, barely noticeable. Then she smiled. Don't. It might run late. Then she was gone. I sat on the couch for hours, waiting. Not because I expected her to come home soon, but because I couldn't stop replaying that hesitation, that pause, that split second of something that felt too much like guilt. I didn't want to be paranoid. I didn't want to be the husband who imagined things that weren't there. But the doubt was growing, and I was starting to wonder if I was too late to stop whatever was coming next. Doubt had settled into my bones like a sickness I couldn't shake. Every time I tried to push it away, to convince myself that I was just being paranoid, something else would happen that made it impossible to ignore. Lauren had always been busy with work, but now she was absent in a way that felt intentional, as if she was avoiding me. She left early, came home late, and when she was here, it felt like she wasn't really present. I would catch her staring at her phone, a faint smile playing at her lips before she quickly tucked it away. If I asked her about it, she would sigh, her patience wearing thin. Just work stuff, she would say, her tone dismissive, as if I were being ridiculous for even asking. It wasn't just the secrecy, it was the way she carried herself. There was a new energy to her, a spark I hadn't seen in years. She was dressing differently, wearing perfume more often, paying attention to details she hadn't before. When I told her she looked nice one evening before she left for another late-night work dinner, she barely acknowledged it. A quick, thanks, over her shoulder, nothing more. There was a time when she would have smiled, kissed me on the cheek, asked if I liked her dress. Now, it was as if my opinion didn't matter at all. The silences between us grew longer. At first, they were just pockets of quiet, moments where she seemed lost in thought. But then they became walls, barriers that neither of us tried to break. I would sit beside her on the couch, and she would scroll through her phone, barely glancing up. At night, she would turn away from me in bed, her body curled toward the edge as if she needed as much space as possible. When was the last time she had reached for me? I couldn't remember. Then came the night that changed everything. She had told me she would be working late again, but I had stopped believing that was the full story. It was almost 2 in the morning when I heard the front door unlock. I had been sitting in the living room, lights off, waiting. Not because I wanted a confrontation, but because I needed to see her reaction when she walked in. I needed to know if the guilt was written on her face, if there was anything left of the woman who used to look at me like I was the most important thing in her world. She stepped inside quietly, as if hoping not to wake me. When she saw me sitting there, her shoulders stiffened for half a second before she forced a casual smile. "You're still up?" she asked, her voice light. But there was something behind it, an edge of discomfort she was trying to hide. "Where were you?" I kept my tone even, not wanting to sound accusatory, but I could see the way her expression changed. It was subtle, just a flicker of something in her eyes before she smoothed it over. She let out a breath, setting her purse down on the table. "I told you, I had a late meeting. We grabbed dinner afterward, and I lost track of time." Her voice was steady, but I wasn't sure if that made me feel better or worse. It was too controlled, too rehearsed. Something about the way she smelled hit me then. It wasn't just her usual perfume. There was something else, something unfamiliar. It clung to her, mixing with the scent of alcohol and the faint traces of cigarette smoke. I knew she didn't smoke. "You smell different," I said, not accusing, just observing. She hesitated, just for a second. A tiny pause that might have meant nothing, but in that moment, it felt like everything. Then she gave a small laugh, shaking her head. "Probably from the restaurant. You know how places are, everything lingers on your clothes." She was already walking past me, moving toward the bedroom before I could say anything else. Just like that, the conversation was over. She wasn't offering me any more explanations, and she wasn't asking me any questions, either. She didn't ask why I had been sitting there in the dark, didn't ask if I was okay, didn't seem to care at all. I stayed in the living room long after she disappeared into the bedroom. My mind kept circling back to the same thoughts, the same questions. I didn't want to believe she was lying to me, but every instinct I had told me something wasn't right. I had trusted Lauren with everything, believed that what we had was unshakable. But now, for the first time in our marriage, I wasn't sure if I knew her at all. I needed answers, and I couldn't wait for her to give them to me. I had spent weeks drowning in doubt, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things, that Lauren wasn't the kind of woman who would betray me. But doubt only exists in the absence of proof, and I was done living in uncertainty. I needed the truth, no matter how ugly it was. The next evening, I told Lauren I had a late shift. She barely reacted, just nodded and muttered something about having dinner with friends. I didn't push. I wanted her to think I was out, to believe she had the night to herself, whoever she really was anymore. Instead of going to work, I parked a few streets away and waited. The hours ticked by, my jaw clenched so tight I could feel the pressure in my skull. My hands gripped the steering wheel, fingers tapping restlessly. I had no idea what I was about to find, but deep in my gut, I already knew. At exactly 9:47 p.m., I saw her car pull into the driveway. She sat there for a moment, checking her phone, adjusting her hair in the mirror. I watched as she stepped out, her dress hugging her curves, heels clicking against the pavement. She had dressed up for this. My blood burned hot in my veins, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. Then I saw him. A man stepped out from the shadows near our house, meeting her at the front door. He was tall, broad-shouldered, confident. There was something sickeningly familiar about him. Then, when the porch light hit his face, my stomach dropped. I knew him. I had been searching for him for months. Christopher Reed, a wanted fugitive, a man I had hunted, investigated, chased through the underbelly of the city. A man with a rap sheet that included armed robbery, drug trafficking, and assault. He had slipped through my fingers more times than I cared to admit. And now he was here, with my wife. Something inside me snapped. I flung the car door open, rage propelling me forward with more force than I had ever felt in my life. Lauren had just unlocked the door when I stormed up the driveway. The moment she saw me, her entire body stiffened. Her lips parted in shock, but before she could speak, my voice cut through the night like a gunshot. "What the fuck is this?" Christopher turned, his expression shifting from amusement to something harder, more calculating. His instincts kicked in fast. Criminals like him were always ready to run. But not this time. Not when he was in my house. Before he could take a step, I was on him. I grabbed him by the collar, slamming him against the wall beside the door. The impact rattled the porch light above us, casting sharp, flickering shadows over his face. "You son of a bitch," I growled, my grip tightening around his throat. "Do you have any idea who I am?" I saw the moment realization dawned in his eyes. I saw the second he understood that he hadn't just screwed some cop's wife. He had screwed my wife. Lauren was screaming something, but I wasn't listening. All I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears, the roaring fury that drowned out everything else. I twisted his arm behind his back, shoving him face first against the brick wall. His body tensed, but he didn't fight. He knew better. He knew I had him. "You're under arrest," I snarled, my knee pressing hard into his spine. "And believe me, this is going to be a long fucking night for you." As I reached for my handcuffs, I caught a glimpse of Lauren standing frozen in the doorway, her face pale, her hands trembling. She wasn't just afraid, she was ashamed. But I wasn't done with her. Not even close. Christopher Reed was in cuffs before he could utter a single word of protest. His face was pressed against the cold brick of my house, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. I could feel the tension in his body, the way he wanted to fight back, but knew he was outmatched. I wasn't just another cop hauling him in. I was the husband of the woman he had just been inside of. Lauren stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes wide with shock, her lips trembling as if she was trying to find the right words. But there were no right words. There was nothing she could say that would make this moment anything less than what it was, a complete and final betrayal. "Daniel, please," she started, her voice shaking. "Shut the hell up," I snapped, my rage cutting through her like a blade. I yanked Christopher away from the wall and forced him toward my patrol car, shoving him into the back seat. He groaned as he landed hard, the metal cuffs biting into his wrists. I slammed the door shut and turned back to Lauren. My heart was still pounding, but now the anger had settled into something colder, sharper. I had spent months, years, building a life with this woman, believing in her, trusting her. And all along, she had been sneaking around behind my back. With him. A fugitive. A criminal. A man I had been trying to put behind bars while my own wife was spreading her legs for him. She took a step toward me, her hands reaching out like she could somehow fix this. Daniel, I swear, don't, I growled, my voice low and dangerous. Don't you fucking dare. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt nothing for them. Not anymore. I walked past her into the house, my entire body buzzing with adrenaline. The scent of her perfume mixed with the lingering musk of sex made my stomach turn. I marched straight to our bedroom, the same bed she had probably let him touch her in, and started tearing through her things. I grabbed her clothes from the closet and yanked them down in armfuls, tossing them into a pile on the floor. Shoes, dresses, jewelry, everything she had ever brought into this house. She ran in after me, her voice panicked. Daniel, what are you doing? Stop. I didn't stop. I moved to the bathroom, grabbing her makeup, her perfume, her shampoo, every single thing that had her scent, her touch. By the time I was done, there was nothing left in this house that belonged to her. I turned to her, my breathing heavy, my hands clenched into fists. You're done here. Get the hell out of my house. She shook her head, tears spilling over her cheeks. Please, we can talk about this. It was a mistake. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just bitter, hollow amusement. A mistake? A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is burning dinner. This was a choice. Over and over again. And now you get to live with the consequences. Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. I walked past her, heading straight for the front door. I pulled my keyring from my pocket and removed her house key, then turned and tossed it at her feet. You don't live here anymore, Lauren. You don't fucking exist to me anymore. Then, without another word, I walked outside, locked the door behind me, and left her standing there with nothing. I didn't look back as I walked away from the house. I didn't need to. I could already hear Lauren's choked sobs behind me, the way she called my name, her voice desperate, breaking. Maybe a part of her had convinced herself that I would listen, that I would soften, that I would let her explain. She was wrong. The second I caught her with Christopher Reed, our marriage was over. No drawn-out arguments, no second chances, no tears that could undo what she had done. She had already made her choice. Now she had to live with it. I got into my patrol car, the weight of everything pressing down on my chest like a boulder. Christopher sat in the back, his hands still cuffed behind him, his jaw tight. He knew he was fucked. I had spent months tracking him, searching for leads, running down every dead-end tip. Turns out, all this time, he had been closer than I ever imagined, sleeping with my wife under my own goddamn roof. Bad luck, huh? I said, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. He didn't respond. His face was set, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. He wasn't scared, not exactly. Men like him didn't scare easy. But he knew this wasn't just any arrest. He knew that the man who had him in cuffs wasn't just a cop doing his job, he was a husband who had been betrayed. And that made things personal. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine roaring to life. You should have run while you had the chance, Reed, I muttered. Now, you're mine. I drove him straight to the station, barely saying a word the entire way. Processing him was routine, fingerprints, mugshots, paperwork. But the entire time, I felt the rage still simmering beneath my skin. When I finally locked him in a holding cell, I leaned against the bars and looked him in the eye. You know, I said, my voice cold, I've spent months looking for you. Funny how you turned up exactly where I didn't expect you. He smirked, but it was weak. He knew better than to push me right now. I turned and walked out, shutting the door behind me with finality. Christopher Reed was out of my hands now. The system would deal with him. But Lauren? That was another matter entirely. By the time I got back home, it was past midnight. As I pulled up to the house, I wasn't surprised to see Lauren still standing outside. She was shivering, her arms wrapped around herself, her makeup smudged from crying. I got out of the car and walked toward the front door, ignoring her completely. Daniel, she pleaded, stepping closer. Please, just talk to me. I unlocked the door and stepped inside without hesitation. Before she could follow, I turned and met her eyes one last time. Go find a hotel, I said coldly. Then I shut the door in her face and locked it. I stood there for a moment, my breath steady, my pulse finally slowing. On the other side of the door, I could hear her muffled sobs, hear the way she tried the handle, hoping I'd let her back in. But I wouldn't. I turned away, walked deeper into my house, and let the silence settle around me. Lauren was gone. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, staring at the darkened walls of what used to be our home, now nothing more than a hollow space filled with memories I didn't want anymore. The echoes of Lauren's laughter, the warmth of her touch, the life we had built together, it was all tainted now, poisoned by the choices she had made. Outside, the night stretched on, quiet except for the occasional sound of a passing car. I knew she was still out there, sitting in her car or maybe pacing the driveway, waiting for me to change my mind. But she didn't knock again. She knew better. By morning, she was gone. I stepped outside and let the cold morning air fill my lungs. The driveway was empty, the last traces of her presence wiped away. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt in control. There was no more doubt, no more waiting, no more wondering. It was over. I spent the next few hours clearing out the house. Every trace of her had to go. Clothes, shoes, jewelry, everything she had left behind was shoved into trash bags. The bedsheets, the pillows, even the damn coffee mug she used, I tossed them all. I wasn't going to let a single piece of her linger in my space. By midday, I changed the locks. Not just the front door, but everything: windows, back entrance, even the garage code. She would never set foot in this house again. The messages started soon after. Lauren, Daniel, please. Can we talk? Lauren, I know I messed up, but we can fix this. I love you. Lauren, please don't shut me out like this. I blocked her number. Then came the messages from mutual friends. Some were neutral, asking what had happened. Others took her side, calling me cold, saying I should at least hear her out. I ignored them all. There was nothing left to say. 2 days later, I filed for divorce. The process was cleaner than I expected. No children, no shared businesses, no reason to drag it out. She tried to fight it at first, but after weeks of silence from me, she finally signed the papers. A month passed, then another. Life moved on. I focused on work, on rebuilding the pieces of myself she had shattered. I hit the gym harder, stayed longer at the precinct, buried myself in things that reminded me that I was still me, that I wasn't defined by her betrayal. Lauren reached out once more, one last desperate attempt. I didn't read the message. I deleted it without opening it. The past was dead, and I had no intention of ever looking back.